Well, welcome everyone. This is the main Liviana slide that they asked me to put up. So the session will be recorded so that it can be shared online, just so you know. And if you have any questions about that, you can email the organizers. And the rest, I think, speaks for itself. All right, so this session is about navigating the false binary between critical and constructive research practices towards ubiquitous community economies. And my name is Anna, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Rural Sociology Group in the University of Wageningen in the Netherlands. So this session is basically it came forth from some questions I had whilst engaging with the diverse economies literature. And I really hope to just kind of start a discussion on the topics that were also described in the session description. But to kind of maybe give a little start to get the discussion going, I want to briefly introduce some of the questions that I have and some of the issues that arose during my own fieldwork and during the reading of various other articles and books. Okay, so why this topic for me? I'm doing research on food forestry practices in the Netherlands, and food forestry, for those who don't know, is a type of agriculture where a farmer mimics a natural ecosystem using mainly perennial species that are edible or either usable for timber instead of annual crops. And the idea here is that the system can maintain itself so that it doesn't really need any external input and very little labor from the farmer as well. And it's become really popular in the Netherlands in recent years. So I wanted to take a diverse economies approach to food forestry to see kind of what was happening within these different sites of food forestry and kind of get an idea about the economic diversity that is happening in and around these food forests. And I also wanted to take a participatory action research approach because it is kind of a social movement in the Netherlands, and I really wanted to facilitate this movement and kind of help them also answer some of the questions that they had. So it was really also definitely from a kind of activist point of view, where I also really feel urged by contributing to an agricultural transformation towards something a little bit less detrimental for the environment. So in my own research, I already sort of felt this tension between wanting transformation, but also wanting to kind of represent all the different economic activities, but also the different people involved. And I found very quickly that that was a very difficult thing for me to overcome, because as soon as you want to be more inclusive of different perspectives, the more difficult it becomes to actually take a stance. So this was something that I struggled a bit with. And then in preparation of the fieldwork, I have been reading a lot of diverse economies literature as well. And then during the Communities Economies Winter Summer School in 2022, I was reading a lot more and having conversations with different people. And then I also noticed that a lot of the community economies scholarship is devoted to kind of exploring this economic diversity, but not really going beyond kind of uniting this in a greater kind of transformation on a larger level. It stays very much or often, I'm very much generalizing now, but my understanding then was that it stayed very much in at the context-based scale or level. So some background. In the end of capitalism as we knew it from 1996, obviously Gibson Graham introduced this notion of capitalocentrism, which I misspelled, I see now in my PowerPoint, apologies. This was a very, very nuanced account that actually sort of suggested three possible trajectories to follow from this idea that the kind of the concept of capitalism is viewed in a certain way. And the first one is exploring practices that are rendered hidden by capitalocentrism, which is the one I just described as well, looking into this economic diversity on the ground, and as a consequence, kind of reenacting kind of economies that are desirable. But the second one is finding links between these practices to build collective power. And the third one is actually reconstructing a radical critique of the enemy formerly known as capitalism. But yeah, my experience, like I said, has been kind of that this community economy scholarship kind of focuses on this first one rather than the second and the third. And yeah, another article by Gibson Graham in 2014 also really promotes and argues for thick description and weak theory, which kind of corroborates this as well. So then, yeah, there is quite some literature out there already that kind of tries to bring back, power or, more kind of tendencies towards strong theory. But they still left me with quite some questions. So yeah, I think now I would like to suggest to just go through those, but maybe if someone already has something, any thoughts or questions now, yeah, feel free to ask. No questions? I forgot to mention, but Elena created a Google Docs as well, and it's in the chat. So yeah, feel free to just add any thoughts and questions that you have in there as well, if you don't want to say them out loud. We can maybe come back to them.
Yeah, I can just say a little bit about that. That's just because I'm sitting as the liaison for today's session. So my job is to make an archive of our discussions today. So I thought I would use this template as a way for kind of capturing any thoughts that are coming up that wouldn't necessarily be in the slideshow or whatsoever. So if you are also doodling or taking notes or want to share links or anything like that, we can also store them in this place as well. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, so if there's no questions already now, then yeah, I'll just go through some of the literature that I found that I think is interesting, yeah, to maybe take with us in this discussion, in this session. So one article is by, so most of the articles that I included here, by the way, are all from people within the community economies scholarship, so there'll be quite some familiar names, I think. But one interesting article is by Ethan Miller, in which he looked at, in which he mentioned that there are 3 moments in establishing a community economy, community economy. And the first one is the ontological moment, which resists any singular ontological starting point. Then there's the ethical moment in which negotiation is possible. And then there's the political moment, which attempts closure. So the ontological moment, again, kind of refers to this finding out of economic diversity and kind of seeing how that unfolds, how it takes place, and how it affects the people that engage with it. Then the ethical moment more refers to, okay, what is desirable? Do we kind of want to support this type of economic activity or not? And then the political moment kind of refers to this more transformational element, again, trying to make change. And this transformation, yeah, which is something that I sort of aspire to in my work as well, but it's something that, yeah, I have great difficulty with of actually sort of writing about, because in my view, closure or transformation sort of necessarily requires some strong theory or at least some strong claims about something. And yeah, a question I had about this is then how to protect diversity and inclusion when action is so urgently needed, when diversity and inclusion often really slows down the process. So yeah, that was one question, and I think, yeah, we can go back to these questions at any point, but yeah, for now I'll just continue with some other literature and questions that I attached to them. Another article that I read was by Naylor and Thayer, in which they wrote about diverse economies and decolonial theory, where they said that the diverse economies scholarship tends to underplay the role of colonialism in the current economy, and it's not normative enough. and they state that structural violence affects heterogeneous communities worldwide. So they argue that we should dismantle the unproductive binary of strong versus weak theory and use both to kind of elucidate this economic diversity, but also placing it in this greater structure of unequal power relations, where some types of economic activities or some types of groups and people are structurally put at a disadvantage. And in my interpretation, I really align strong theory with essentialism and weak theory with anti-essentialism, and the latter, like, very clearly belongs within the diverse economies scholarship. But I find it very difficult to sort of unite the two, to like saying, oh yeah, okay, let's bridge them and like use both strong and weak theory to kind of have the best of both worlds. It sounds a little bit like more easier said than done in my interpretation, because how I see it, it's ontological opposites in a way, because one assumes that there's some sort of essence to things that can be represented in a somewhat simplistic way to sort of represent this essence rather than the diversity and difference. And the other one, opposes this idea. It says that there's no essence to anything. Another article is by Nathan Gabriel, I think, and Eric Sarmiento. And they also actually had a whole issue, a special issue on power and community economies in Rethinking Marxism, the journal. And in this specific article, they plead to use a critique and also power to advance community economies, in addition to kind of this reading for difference. And I quoted them here, saying that recovering and strengthening economic difference begins with the recognition that difference is rendered invisible, illegal, and illegitimate by some collection of forces. So and again, a question I had here was, while it can be empowering to focus on what is already going well, can grassroots success stories ultimately improve the position of marginalized groups, again placing them in this kind of like structural disadvantage that these kinds of groups sometimes have? Okay, so those were kind of some ideas that I had, and now I'm very curious to hear what you think about all of this, and if you have any thoughts, or if you have any question that also speaks to you, and we can go back to that one. So hereby I would like to open the floor.
Anna, would you go back? Maybe we can look at some of the slides again. Would that be helpful for everybody?
Yeah.
And did we read this
I think
one?
maybe we skipped this one. I don't know. I may have accidentally pressed too quickly on the in navigating the PowerPoint. Yeah, I can still say something about this one as well. This is an article by Tuomo Al-Hojarvi. I'm probably not pronouncing this correctly. Who also had an article in this same special issue on power and community economies. And he also argued that capitalocentrism in and of itself is also not as transparent as it sometimes is portrayed to be, and it precedes and preconditions our analyses. And it can also be present in absences. And I thought that was actually very powerful, because in my own work, for example, I'm really always trying to not say the word capitalism or not say the word non-capitalism or something like that, but I'm still thinking it. I'm still thinking in those terms. So I think that was a very powerful point. And he also refers to Derrida in stating that there's no end to deconstruction. You can't really treat it as resolved in a way, as some of the diverse economies scholarship sometimes tends to do, in saying like, okay, we acknowledge capitalocentrism is a thing, so now we can look for difference in peace without any concern that we're still being affected by this. Whereas of course it's not as easily resolved. So then again, also in this question, then if there's no end to deconstruction, then how can transformative efforts ever be justified or legitimized, knowing that It's just a point in a process rather than an end. And transformation is, of course, pretty definitive. So yeah, these are just kind of, yeah, this again, I think also resonates with some of the other questions that I had. Elena, you're on mute.
Thanks. I thought I liked this one. I could talk some more with you guys about this one, perhaps. Is there maybe someone else that has another favorite, or can we start on this one? Hi, Maria.
Hi, sorry, I was a bit late. So, but I'm interested also in this one, this topic specifically, the trouble. It's a very interesting idea, I think. Um, I like how Donna Haraway puts it in staying with the trouble as starting to engage with complex problems in the present, and really like not she puts it as not trusting in techno fixes, and also not shying away from the problems, and not just saying there's no way out. I think this is very interesting. And I just have a question on what do you mean when you say reading for trouble? I don't think I quite understood this. If you could like maybe explain this a bit more.
Yeah, it very much refers to Donna Haraway's Sticking with the
Okay.
Trouble. Yeah, so it's that, yeah, it makes sense that you also recognize that there. So yeah, his argument is really to kind of stay very critical of our own position as well, and of our own yeah, how capitalocentrism may affect our own view in a way. So yeah, I think how I interpreted it is that it's a lot about, yeah, being reflexive on your own practice and on your own work. Yeah, instead of just treating the capitalocentrism idea as something that is fixed already, but kind of rather than treating it as an ongoing process that we need to sort of keep resisting. And that, yeah, is often quite uncomfortable. And I think, yeah, that's also what he meant by, yeah, sticking with the trouble, or like reading for trouble, like where are the discrepancies? And I think like, yeah, also my entire question here about like navigating this false binary between critical and constructive research practices is already like a bit uncomfortable. Like I think so these kinds of questions, I think, are also important in this idea to kind of like stick with the difficult, unsolvable questions rather than just picking apart something, or yeah, picking something that is more easily solved.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think also the idea of absences is very interesting, because it's a bit more the idea of capitalocentrism. It's not the problem of what there is, but what there isn't in the in the representations.
Yeah.
Noticing the absences is very important.
Yeah, and also very difficult. Because how do you notice something that isn't there?
Yeah, I'm doing a project about that. About the filling these absences with other stories, and it's a collaboration with a newspaper where I live, and I am doing a podcast with diverse economy about diverse economies in this region, and each episode is one initiative that talks about a specific topic, and so to share with the public the diversity in the place, and
Oh, nice.
a bit fill that gap in the media, this absence.
That's very interesting. Where are you based?
Bolzano, Italy.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So yeah, thank you for your presentations. Very interesting.
Thanks. Yeah, I can also go to another slide if someone else maybe wants to share some thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'm interested in this like present in the absences bit because I haven't been introduced to that thought before, and I'm also very consciously not using certain terms in my writing, and also really struggling about when I use what terms. So right now it's about like what do we call natural resource management if we're kind of interested in a more than human perspective. So sometimes not using the term natural resource management is probably like screaming in the text because the reader would be like, why aren't you just calling it natural resource management? Because that's what it is, and that's like the journal you're submitting to or something. So yeah, so now I'm trying to figure out like, is it okay to still use certain terms when I'm actively thinking about my politics of language, why I'm using this term in this context, and is it clear for my reader why I'm using that term, or do they just think I'm confused about my terms and I'm just using a whole term soup without any sort of intention? I think this is a really big question for me. If we're not going to call it capitalism, then we're going to call it capitalist practices, you know, or any other version of these. Like if we're not going to say, you know, like if we're wanting to use terms like more than human or earth kin or these kind of things, like, does that mean that we eliminate the first alternative that we're trying to critique, or do we still include it, and in what ways? That's a great question.
I wonder if then maybe it would also just be maybe logical to address that you're actively not using that term for so and so reasons, so that the reader is at least like aware of that it's like they're trying to reenact a different vocabulary around a certain topic, as opposed to just like taking the easy way out and sticking with a problematic word or phrase or something. Oh yeah, I wonder if that would help maybe.
There's an interesting reading about this, about words for transformation, of David Bollier and Silke Helfli. It's called Free, Fair, and Alive, and they have an entire chapter about vocabulary, and for example, they present misleading binaries, and they explain why they are misleading, and they make very interesting analysis about them. And they also have words that they don't want to use, and they explain why. For example, citizens, instead of addressing to citizens, they address to people, or to, I don't know, they have like other words for that, but they say citizenship talks about the legal state that not everyone has, so you're leaving people out. Or they have governance, they change for peer governance. I don't know, they have very interesting ideas, and maybe also some words that we don't question though so much. Reading it, it was like, oh yeah. Also maybe resources, they were criticizing a bit because it just talks about nature as not beyond human consumption, not with its own value. No, they have. I really recommend to read that chapter because it's really, really interesting in this sense, and I think I agree that it makes sense to address in your writing that you're using certain terms in a certain way for a reason, so that the reader immediately understands.
Nice. Yeah, could you maybe share the title of the chapter in the chat?
Yes, I write it in the chat.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, language is a very interesting topic always, in the sense that it's very performative in a way, but I also, again, in light of this, there's no end to deconstruction. Sometimes it also feels very difficult to be very committed to like an alternative phrasing when you sort of know that in maybe 10 years time that phrasing is also going to be problematized probably. I wonder if you maybe have any thoughts on that.
That also might relate to Suma's comment that you posted in the chat, maybe.
Okay, yeah, I can't really read the chat because I'm sharing my screen. So yeah, maybe if people are posting things in the chat, could you let me know, Elena?
Sure, I can read her comment if that's okay, Suma.
Yeah.
And she said she's posting here, really interesting. Are you able to reflect more on what you mean with political moment as the essential moment? Or that the problem of transformation is that there's no end to it? She says, I've been thinking that the transformation of political moment will also have many twists and turns, and maybe then the question of each work or each situation to reflect why this is to move or closure is a step forward or backwards.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. That's yeah, also something I was thinking a bit about. So the way that they describe it here is not that those moments are necessarily linear in any way, and that there's only ever three in one community economy. It's kind of, yeah, a kind of a more messy process, and generally you start with the ontological moment, but the ethical and political moment kind of sort of intersect with the rest as well. But then, yeah, I would say like as soon as the political moment, which attempts closure, probably new problems arise, and then you need to start with the ontological moment again. That's at least how I interpreted it in this. And yeah, I think moment is just kind of a word chosen to kind of capture that this does sort of take some sort of deliberation or a point in time where this is actively deliberated in developing a community economy. And but it's not necessarily a moment in the sense that it's like a singular snapshot in which you make one decision and then yeah, the whole development of a certain community economy is just sort of set in stone. I think it's more messy and non-linear in that sense. But yeah, so in that sense, maybe also reflecting on your comment, I think maybe we just need to accept that closure always necessarily is going to leave out some things and probably create new problems. But that we still need to sort of aspire towards changing the current problems by transforming towards something better, knowing that we can never get to something perfect, which is of course also impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was interested in this particular quote, and I think in a way it kind of comes back to your point around, you know, do we have a constructive stance or do we have a critical stance? Because I'm doing a part-time action research PhD as well, and I guess the sort of the framing that I'm drawing on is more the Gibson Graham framing around, you know, that if you go from diverse economy into actually participating in developing a community economy initiative, then you have this politics of language, a politics of subjectivity, and a politics of collective action. And I guess part of what I'm struggling with at the moment is that I'm drawing on that theory quite strongly, but my supervisors keep saying, "Oh, but you've got to be critical of that theory," which can be challenging. And I guess that the stance that I'm taking on that is that my experience of working within the community economy, which I've done for a long time, is that there's a tendency within this literature to almost say it's all about the initial forming process, the beginning of a process. So, you know, if you read something like Take Back the Economy, it's very much about the kind of decision making you take, but at the beginning of a process. But you're never really at the beginning of a process, I don't think. You know, a process, or, you know, it's always emerged from some confluence of other things that you've been involved in. And so I'm interested in, like in terms of collective action, I'm interested in the kind of process dimension of collective action. Or so when I read something about closure, I'm thinking, well, why would anybody use that word closure? That there's never closure. There's only, it's like Hannah Arendt talks about, you know, in the sphere of action, we may make a decision together. And in a sense, there's a closure, but there's only a closure while you try out what you've decided on. But what you've decided on will never play out in the way that you anticipate. And so you have to return and reconsider and rethink. And I guess I don't like the word critical, but I suppose my criticism would be that there isn't that emphasis on the ongoing processes that are actually, you know, a key part of collective action. And I think that, yeah, like you said at the beginning, there's too much emphasis on the sort of diverse economy bit, because that's kind of easy. You know, we can do these kind of inventories, and maybe that's a bit harsh to say it's easy, but I don't see so much literature that really is exploring what it's like to be within a community economy initiative, as opposed to an idealized kind of starting of a community economy initiative. And so Ethan Miller's kind of, his 3 moments to me feel a little bit like that they're kind of an idealized starting point almost, ending with a closure, whatever that means. Anyway, that was my rambling thoughts on this particular slide.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I really resonate with what you said about there not really ever being a full closure. I should say that the text by Ethan Miller is way more nuanced than I've like summarized it here. And he also does stress that it's an attempt at closure, in the same sense that I think in general, with these types of practices or research or in practice, we're striving towards some sort of utopic horizon that we'll never get to. And I think that does sort of shine through in this work as well. It's not really saying that we can ever get there fully. So this process is kind of ongoing, but I fully agree that, yeah, the focus is very much on this first moment of starting, of kind of getting started to do something new and to find something desirable that we can explore and perform and sort of manifest, as opposed to kind of seeing then, okay, but yeah, what would happen after that? Yeah, I also don't really know many articles that actually explore an active established community economy. That would be very interesting, but maybe, yeah, that's also maybe too early. I don't know. Are there many full community economies? I don't know, actually. What is a perfect community economy anyway?
But I don't think anybody would say there's ever perfect community economy. I mean, it's interesting when you look back at, like, Gibson Graham's 2 books, they talk about Mondragon, and that was quite a kind of, you know, quite an influence on their thinking. And the Mondragon cooperatives, you know, they're based on this notion of, I can't say it right, but formation, you know, this ongoing process of whatever, you know, resubjectification and education. And like the founder of the Mondragon Co-op said, it's not an economic initiative, it's an educational initiative, an ongoing educational initiative. But yeah, I don't know. You know, I work in a particular area, and you know, we have a community economy. It's definitely not perfect, and it's not very extensive, but it's there, and it's been there for probably decades. So you're always stepping into a space where, you know, you're joining particular strands or movements or whatever. So yeah, so that is an area that I have an issue with, that notion that you're ever starting something. So for example, earlier this week with Elena, we had a session on energy, and Sean was also there, but I was involved in a affordable housing project, and it took them 14 years. They've just moved in. It's like the biggest affordable co-housing project in Britain. But that's not closure, because they have to build their common house. They haven't got enough money, so they're doing that in a really interesting way. Or they have very complicated energy systems, but they don't have really to work with them best. And so, yeah, do people really start with a kind of utopian vision that they're kind of trying to reach, or are they just always in this process of reconfiguring, renegotiating or whatever?
I think, can you hear me all right?
There's some echoing in the back a bit, but I think.
So yeah, I think I agree with what Tim just said, and one of the the way I see the kind of community economies stuff is it is a performance in and of itself. It's an intervention. You document, or you document diversity in order to intervene, in order to change. And I kind of see it as, I guess I'm take more of a kind of critical stance in my research in general, but sort of as a set of tools for experimenting with, a set of tools for experimenting to see if you can, and you pick a tool, whether you want to map the diversity, or whether you want to do a hours clock, or whether you want to map who owns the property, or where the surplus is going. All of those tools that, I'm thinking of the tech economy tools as like a way of reperforming, and that never being done. That closure is that you've chosen a tool and you've chosen to change the performances, and then you choose a new tool, or you change the tool, or you decide that it's not the right one for the next bit. Similarly with, I don't know, participatory processes, you're gonna choose a stakeholder engagement method, or you're going to choose a community assembly method, or whatever. It's a way of collectively intervening and to make an ethical change, and you're going to have ethical coordinates around that. I don't really see, and I see the kind of diverse mapping, which is, yes, it is kind of a focus of quite a lot of community economies work, as just one of those tools. It's one of the ways of ontologically changing the world, but it's not the only way of, and with other ramifications. That's how I sort of have been thinking, at least recently, about the power, how the kind of ontological tools of community economy works kind of intersects with power. They are a performative tool in and of themselves, and they change the world, not just in the kind of understandings of it, and but they also have a more material impact. And I think, I don't know, that's maybe critical realism creeping in, but that is how I'm kind of seeing it and conceptualizing it.
But then in your work on kind of mapping these different things, do you stay then very much with the thick description and weak theory then? Just kind of describing, documenting different negotiations that might be happening, but without really making any claims?
I haven't got there yet. I'm not quite sure.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, I've got very, very little data yet for my PhD. I'm still kind of conceptualizing what I'm going to do with it. So I'm not sure yet.
Because yeah, I think I'm taking a very similar approach to you. I'm also just kind of documenting the different economic practices that are happening, and documenting the power struggles, documenting everything I can document based on people's experiences. But then I find it very difficult to actually say something that would maybe help them. Yeah, that's also when I'm sorry for being very incoherent, because the thoughts are just kind of going in every direction at the moment. But when talking to the participants for my PhD, people really want more quick change in a way. They want the laws and regulations to be more conducive to food forests. They want more subsidies to become available. And there's often kind of this question from provinces and from municipalities to prove the productivity or the economic viability of food forests in a very much kind of neoliberal kind of capitalist kind of way, where there's only one type of profit that is counted, and it's a monetary profit based on the product sales as opposed to anything else. So there's this question of really radically sort of changing the rules and regulations around this to make the environment for food forests in the Netherlands more welcoming and easy. So then I wonder, is describing the struggle, is that enough? Like, am I doing enough in that sense? And yes, like I agree, by sort of engaging with those different negotiating processes between food forestry practitioners and municipalities and provinces and banks and whatever is very valuable, because it does sort of also focus already on this diverse economic practice that isn't just traditional agriculture. But then, I wonder if maybe there's more that could be done in order to sort of advance this transformation in a bit of a quicker way. Maria?
Hi. I just have more of a question, because since I'm a bit new to diverse economies and community economies theory, I'm wondering, and I read a lot, but I still don't fully understand the passage from diversity economies to community economies. Like, I understand this idea of inventorying in order to create a framework that allows for ethically oriented economies to arise, but having
You froze for a sec. Could you repeat what you said?
Oh yeah, sorry. I was just wondering how this passage from diversity economies to community economies work, how one theory fits into the other, and also how in practice this moves from one thing to the other. Okay, so you, for what I understood, diverse economies is about inventorying and communicating this diversity for creating a narrative that is more open and a framework that allows for more ethically oriented practices to arise. But I don't fully understand how this actually happens in practice. If these community economies have to be like a community that has a very specific practice going on for a long time, or if you can also call community economy a short interaction between two people that is ethically oriented, or like, I feel like I don't fully understand this transition, and maybe it's because I didn't read enough, but if someone is able to like explain this a bit more, it would be interesting.
I can attempt to explain my understanding of it, which may also not be perfect. But how I see it, diverse economies really refers to this indeed kind of like the generative practice where you identify and inventory diverse economic practices, which can be just anywhere. And community economies is, I think, more, how I see it, is kind of more of the activist side of that research coin, where you really specifically work with something that is already sort of a community economy or is working to become like a community economy. It's more practitioner based or in a specific setting. So I think, to explain it maybe in terms of like food forests, there's quite some just community food forests in the Netherlands that are on public ground, and they really are embedded very much in the neighborhood. And a lot of people interact with those. So within those, I think, you could use either a community economies lens to sort of study that food forest as a community economy, or maybe it's a part of a bigger community economy. Whereas diverse economies, for me, I just see it more as the theory kind of underpinning all of it, where you look at like economic diversity as a starting point, but not necessarily attached to a community, though probably it often is. But I don't know if someone else has something to say about it.
I just put in the chat one of the quotes that I like, I think from Gibson Graham. She says, unlike the proliferative fullness of the diverse economy, the community economy is an emptiness, as it has to be if the project of building it is to be political, experimental, open and democratic. And then they say a community economy is an ethical and political space of decision, not a geographic or social commonality, and community is its outcome rather than a ground. And I always like that quote, but at the same time, it doesn't really give you any guidance. And yeah, so I think it's kind of interesting. It sort of, it kind of tells you what you shouldn't be doing, but it doesn't really give you any guidance as to what you should be doing. So maybe that's good.
Yeah, I think that's a nice quote.
It's a nice quote. Thank you. Yeah, I hadn't read that part of the book. I mean, yeah. I like I like that it's like two steps, like the fact that you first work on diverse economies and maybe then on community economies somehow. I don't know if this is right, but for example, I now decided to focus on diverse economies only and sort of making this tangible for people, which is quite a challenge because since it's theoretical, it's hard to give, to make it graspable for people that have never been in contact with these theories. So this is, the way I see it is like you create a framework for then allowing these community economies to arise. But first, people need to be aware that there is a world of difference, now as they call it. So I guess you can work on only one of the two, and then they're related and they feed into each other, but they're different in a way, very different approaches.
Yeah, that's also sort of how I treat it. I think in my research, I'm also mostly focused on diverse economies to just kind of do this inventory mapping exercise. And then, yeah, maybe, it turns out that there are some sort of community economies also, sort of happening. Or maybe it turns out that that is also a useful lens to use on some food forests. But yeah, I think it also just becomes more difficult to actually stay consistent if you use both interchangeably.
Makes sense.
But my understanding is that it comes down back to Gibson's Graham's, like this conception of a politics of possibility, that when you start to inventory the difference, it starts to kind of your subjective position shifts because you start to think, oh, I could be doing these things, or I could be involved in this range of things, and then you start to think, oh, and who could I do those things with? So then it leads from like politics of language, politics of subjectivity, into a politics of collective action. So I see them as all together, that if you do engage with the diverse economy, then it is going to shift what you see as possible, or what you can do as, that's
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's also a good point.
Yeah, I guess also in a way in my work, I deal with the two, even if I don't name the two as well, or as much. I don't name community economies as much because I feel like I don't understand it enough to explain it to people. So, but if I do a podcast on the diversity of economies in an economic landscape, in a way, all these initiatives that I'm interviewing and that constitute each episode, there are community economies in a way. I don't know if you can call a solidarity purchasing group a community economy or a time bank. I guess you can. No? Like each of them are this type of initiatives.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure what makes, if they are a community economy in terms of how.
Yeah, I don't really know if things ever are. That's also something that I'm just thinking about now. But if things ever are a community economy in and of that kind of thing, because it's also community economies, right? Like in the sense of you can approach something through a community economies lens rather than essentializing a community economy or what that would be. So yeah,
That
I
makes
think you
sense.
can just approach things as in a community economy rather than
I
yeah.
like this idea. Thank you.
The tool of like using the verb instead of the noun. So
Yeah.
yeah, thanks, Sean. Instead of like capitalism, capitalist practices. And it doesn't really make sense if we only do that for capitalism. Like we should also soften the noun of a community economy and think about practices or lenses or ways of seeing, ways of being, ways of doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, yeah, I think our time is also almost up. So yeah, maybe if you do still have any interesting thoughts or questions, maybe you could write them in the Google Docs, and then yeah, hopefully we can continue this conversation at some point somewhere else. Yeah, and I am planning on writing like a short summary afterwards and sharing that with you if you want. So yeah, I want to thank you so much for participating. Yeah, and I hope to talk to you some other time as well.
Yeah, thank you for opening.
Very interesting.
Guys,
Yeah, thank you very much.
that
Yeah.
I made mistakes or forgotten something in this doc and you want your thoughts more clearly represented, just edit it, go for it. Don't hesitate to change things or add or delete.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's very interesting to talk to you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
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 Yeah, thanks, Anna.
Yeah, thanks for the docs.
Sure.
Hope you also enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I think you brought up a lot of things that I have been over the last year kind of thinking about, but not all in one place. And that was really nice. I think my sort of feeling, my takeaway is like, ¿por qué no los dos? Like, of course we can have both critical and constructive.
Yeah, it's just that like I always just in those papers, when I read those papers, I'm like, yes, yeah, I'm fully convinced, like this makes sense. And then in just like writing about my actual research, then I really struggle actually saying anything useful about it other than just describing it. And even in like kind of being this critical of the different power relations or something like that, I'm still also describing the power relations that are there, but not really like saying anything about it, because of this like kind of wanting to represent the context well. So I'm always kind of sort of the summary of my work is like basically my work. Like I can't really narrow it down because then you would be like simplifying it in a way.
That's true. Have you read Anna Singh's The Mushroom at the End of the World book?
Which ones? Anna Singh?
Anna Singh, The Mushroom at the End
Oh,
of
I think maybe you or someone else has mentioned this to me before, but I haven't read it.
It got really popular actually. There's like a whole chapter on scale, and like I was kind of taking notes and coming back to this to see if I could find the specific passage I was looking for, and I didn't see like the exact quote I was looking for, but she's basically arguing that like listening to and telling a rush of stories is a legitimate scientific method. And she's basically saying like these stories are totally dependent on context and localized and speak to higher narratives. So they're not just like a catalog or like a report, they're also not necessarily building a strong theory, but speaking to larger arcs of the time that we're in.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I like the way she's put it. So yeah, it's chapter 3, somewhere in chapter 3 of this book.
Okay, chapter 3 of this book. Okay, I'll look into
it. I can put it in the Google Doc thingy.
Nice.
Yeah, but again, I'm early in my PhD, so I haven't tried to do this justice in a text. Maybe that's where it gets sticky.
Yeah. It's just always easier said than done, I find. you actually have to do like data analysis is just where I get stuck. But yeah, I guess that is also just sticking with the trouble and just embracing the stuckness.
Yeah, for sure. And she also, in the same chapter, she's talking about like things aren't going to scale a lot of the time because the stories we're trying to capture are resisting the same frameworks that we're critiquing. So like, I often hear that in my work, like as my activist work is with food sharing projects, and you know, these questions, like when we made a film about our project, one of the questions is always like, well, how is this going to scale up, and how are we going to save all the food from your one? And it's like, that's not what we're doing here. We're telling one of the stories, like,
yeah, that's also true. Yeah.
And like our whole point is not to have some plantation copy paste formula that ignores context and ignores biodiversity and ignores the relationship to land. Like, I think the plantation is such a good metaphor for this, of like, why should any research or any story necessarily have a method that works completely perfectly in the next context? And
yeah,
and at the same time, it can still work well enough to show some meaning. So
yeah, I do think that it's still like some some value to be found in that kind of or finding or conceptualizing ways in which different community economic practices can be linked somehow to sort of address this issue of scale in a way. Because like on the one hand, I fully agree that yeah, we're judging it by not a very good standard necessarily, that something should apply in or something should be able to work in every context all across the world. But on the other hand, we are facing problems that require kind of like big, large scale solutions in a way as well. So we do need to address these things, like whether that is the enemy formerly known as capitalism. I really like that the way you put it. But I mean, there is something there that is there's some structural issues that are preventing this ubiquity from happening, and should we do something to address that?
Yeah, and the difference between like ubiquity and like, I love this scale out, not up thing.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I don't know. There's something in this nexus I think is good. I haven't crystallized it yet, but swimming in a lot of those same questions. For sure. And with food forests, but with foraging. So I think we have some things to discuss.
Yeah, it would be nice to maybe discuss it some other time. Again.
I'm grateful for these sessions, and then we can see where we're at going forward. But
thanks for being the liaison. It was nice to have someone else in there helping me with stuff.
Sure, no problem. It was my pleasure.